Are you struggling to plan lessons that actually work for every student in your classroom? Well, in this video, I'm going to be walking you through how to plan a lesson that supports maximum progress. Whether you are an ECT figuring this out for the first time, you've got all of those observed lessons, so you have to be doing these structured lesson plans, or maybe you're an experienced teacher rethinking how your lessons work for all of your students' needs. Plus, I've got a free lesson plan template at the end that you can download, and I'll share the quickest lesson planning win that will save you hours every single week. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Miss Estruch Teach and Tell, the podcast where I go through all things teaching strategies, streamlining, time saving, and also different ways that you can help boost your students' progress. I'm Miss Estruch, a biology teacher, former head of department, and now full-time education content creator online, helping teachers everywhere reclaim their work-life balance. Hey there teachers, welcome to Miss Estruch Teach and Tell, the podcast where every week I dive into all the tips and tricks that make teaching life so much easier. Whether you're a veteran educator, an early career teacher learning the ropes, or balancing the classroom with being a busy parent, this will help you streamline your workload and bring a bit more balance to your life. You bring the coffee and I'll bring the teach and tell. So this episode was actually requested by one of my subscribers of the podcast on YouTube, who asked, could we just go back to the fundamentals for a minute and go through how do you recommend we plan a lesson that is going to be effective and it's going to cater for everyone's needs? So that is what I'm going through today. But before we do that, quick coffee catch-up time. So this week I've been deep in lesson planning mode because I'm planning all the lessons for my Easter biology boot camps. I've got the A-level version and the GCSE version. And it got me thinking, although I've got all of this planned from previous years, I always like to review, reflect, what worked well, what could I tweak, as I'm sure every teacher does. And that's where it got me thinking about what does actually make a great lesson plan. Because for me, I was having to think I need to cater to make this accessible for all, and my context is it's going to be online. I don't necessarily know all of my students' needs. So I was thinking about how can you make lesson plans that are going to ensure the maximum progress for all students you might have present. And that's where I then thought back to that YouTube request, and I thought it'd be a perfect episode for today. So we're going to be looking at how to make a plan that not just covers the spec, but one that helps every student, especially those who might be struggling with attention, reading, or social communications. And if you're an ECT, this is going to be gold dust. But if you're not and you're a veteran teacher like me, it's a great reminder to pause and ask, are my lessons still actually working for all of my students? And if they're not, how can I change it? So let's jump into the main content, how to plan a lesson that works for all of your learners. Let's break it down, starting with number one. I always start with, what is the outcome? What do you want your students to have learned by the end of the lesson? And this is your learning objective. Keep it tight, keep it measurable and accessible. So for example, let's think, describe the structure of DNA, or apply the method of osmosis in a practical investigation. And you might have multiple learning objectives, but try and think about what is your overall outcome, and then you can break that down into your learning objectives. Now, your school might have really tight criteria on the fact you have to have learning objectives every lesson. They might have to be projected or written up. They might have to be written in students' books. They might have to be presented in a particular language and way. But what I would try and do is make sure that if you don't have those tight restrictions to follow, that your learning objectives are phrased in a student-friendly language, and that you do say it out loud in the lesson or project it, just so they are clear. What is the aim? What are we doing today and why? And it's this making it clear and the repetition that will help all learners, especially those who might have working memory difficulties, which is why it can be helpful to keep it up somewhere. Right, number two then, let's think about the starter. So planning that starter to engage the students or to help retrieve information. Now here's where engagement matters. I like to use the idea of retrieval or engagement as a good starter. So you might be retrieving something relevant that they've already learned to activate prior knowledge, or even for you to test maybe a misconception that might feed into this lesson that you need to fix immediately. Or it might be an activity where the pure aim is just to engage students with a hook to spark curiosity and make them engaged and excited for what they're about to learn in the lesson coming up. Now, this can be especially helpful for ADHD or autistic students who benefit from having a clear structure or an early signpost of what is coming. So for example, you might start a lesson on enzymes by asking, why do we not cook eggs in cold water? Or why, when you cook eggs, does it have to be above a certain temperature, for example? So it gets them thinking, it builds a bridge of science to the actual content context, and it's going to get them discussing it. Next then is thinking about delivering the information actively. When I'm teaching you content, and particularly if it's A-level, it can be really hard to not just stand at the front with your PowerPoint and just talk through, deliver the information, because some topics are really content heavy. But I try to actively plan to make sure I do not stand and talk for more than 10 minutes at a time. Even 10 minutes is probably pushing it a bit, but sometimes it is unavoidable. So I want to avoid passive listening, because that is when you get the drifting attention, people looking out the window, people just looking at you, but you know they're looking right through you, doodling, whatever it might be. Especially if it's a student who might have ADHD, or even if it's someone with dyslexia and you're just talking at them for so long, it can be really hard for them to remain focused and to follow what you're saying. So instead, if I do have a topic which is content heavy, which does really need a teacher to explain it to them, what I will plan to do is, first of all, break it into chunks, so I might not have to talk for quite such a long period of time. If it is, I know I'm going to be stood there for at least 10-15 minutes, then I plan questions that I'm going to ask throughout. And the students will have their mini whiteboards, and as I'm talking, I'll then suddenly stop and say, linked to that, here's a question for the mini whiteboards. And it's a great way to then just break it up. It's not just me talking at them the whole time, it's me talking, but now I'm getting you focused again by asking you a question. So that's how I draw back their focus. So if I am talking to them for ages, then at least I'm constantly getting their input through the whiteboards. It just makes it a bit more engaging and makes sure that it brings back their focus if they are getting distracted. I also try to have, if I have got text, make sure I've planned to have visuals as well. So you might have diagrams, just so if it is someone, let's say if they're dyslexic, they might understand better from the diagram than the text. But also for everyone, that dual coding helps as well. And then I do make sure that I repeat and reframe key points. So if I have just done my starter, which might have been 5 to 10 minutes, and then I've talked to them for maybe 10 to 15 minutes, but with those checkpoint questions throughout, then I might have a quick summary where I repeat from what I've just said, we've now gone through this, here are 5 key points. So it's thinking about, it's not just what you're teaching that you're putting in your lesson plan, it's thinking about how you're teaching it. So could you do some pair talks? Could you draw it? Could you show a model? Could you have a demo, a physical object? Could you be questioning them? That's what I like to try to plan in now as well. Planning in how I'm going to keep the students engaged, interested, focused, and wanting to know more. Now, number 4 on my list, I have actually partly said, but halfway through the lesson, I always like to try and plan to have a checkpoint. So it might be a quick quiz, it might be a retrieval task, it might be a mini whiteboard activity, it might be a little worksheet, it might be something that they do in pairs. And the timing for this is deliberate. Halfway through is normally when attention might dip, because that's probably going to be either 25 minutes or 30 minutes in, depending on how long your lessons are. And for most students, particularly neurodivergent students, you are going to have a dip in your attention span after that amount of time. So we need to be stopping, re-engaging them back into the lesson before we then carry on. And as well as that, for students who might have autism, this checkpoint can help offer reassurance, a sense of structure, so they then know what is happening and they're not feeling lost. But that's going to be the case for all students as well. And above all else, it helps to give you data. You can check, have they actually understood what I've said so far? Can we move on? Or do I actually need to re-go through something that I've just said because they've clearly not understood it? Number 5 on my list is I then start to plan what is going to be the main activity. So the application of this knowledge or the skill building. So once you have taught or checked the understanding of whatever that first chunk of information was, whether it was a new bit of theory, information about a practical or a skill, I want to be able to check, have they grasped this? So my main activity might be a written task, or it might be doing the practical. It might be a pair or group discussion for the students, a scaffolded exam question, an investigation, whatever the main activity might be. And the point here is that students are now working actively and independently. So it's no longer teacher-led from the front. And this is where you need to be planning for all your students. So do you need to have for some students, whatever the activity is, maybe a slightly more scaffolded version so that they can still access it in the same way as other students? Do you need to make sure you've got some clear time timings up on the board? Do you need checklists to help some students? Do you know which of your students for that class that you need to make a beeline for and go and support first? So this is the sort of thing in terms of differentiation, supporting your students with the main activity. Yes, you're saying what the main activity is, how it's going to run, but this is where I'd be planning who is going to need my help first, or maybe more of it, and what sort of help do I need to put in place for the different students. Now, if it is an observed lesson, then I would literally be writing this down. As a more experienced teacher, I don't write this down anymore. It's just something that when I am prepping my lesson, which the prep at this stage would just be checking through a PowerPoint, but I'd be thinking it through in my head, or maybe just in the notes section of the PowerPoint, writing down some questions I want to ask. But if you are new to teaching, then I did used to have to write this down. What am I going to do? What questions am I going to ask? What support should I do for X, Y, and Z students? It wasn't just something that came to me naturally because I'd completed or done this so many times before. So depending on what your level of experience is, this might just be actively thinking it before the lesson, or you might be literally writing it down in a lesson plan to support you when you're doing the lesson. And then finally, it's the plenary. Did they get it? At the end of the lesson, we can bring it back to the learning objective. And I might ask, can you summarize what we learned today in one sentence? And then it might be in 2 words, and then in 1 word or a picture, just to get them thinking over and over and over how to make it more specific. Or write down one thing that's clearer now, and then one thing that you're still unsure about. And that sort of activity I like to do on the whiteboards and get them to hold it up, because it actually helps me to think how I can tweak this lesson or what I might need to do at the start of next lesson. It might be some short answer questions just to get an idea as well and for them to see if they progressed. It might be an actual exam question. But plenaries don't need to be fancy, they just need to check, have they learned what you planned for them to achieve? So my overall golden rule then are the 3 questions I like to ask myself in my head before every lesson. Number 1, is this lesson accessible for all the students I'm about to teach in this class? So have I thought about any particular needs? Have I planned visuals? Have I got the appropriate level of scaffolding in place? Have I got enough varied tasks that meet my students' needs? Does it cover all of the learning objectives? Clearly. And the big one for me, this is one of my biggest focuses, is it active rather than passive? Because I shouldn't be the one working the hardest in a lesson. I should be working hardest when I'm planning the lesson and getting all the resources prepared. But when it's actually in the lesson, the student should be working harder than the teacher. And if they're not, then your lesson is too passive for that student. So I always try and think that, are they doing more work than me? I should not be stood at the front of the lesson actively talking for ages, because if I am, it's passive. So that takes us to the quick win of the week. If you want to skip that entire planning process or want a bit of an idea of how I have actually planned my lessons, then I do have my AQA A-level biology lesson PowerPoints ready to go for the entire A-level. Each one covers everything you need for all of the A-level topics for AQA. It has clear learning objectives. You've got your starter, you've got your plenary, you've got your engaging thinking tasks, there's retrieval tasks, and then there's the knowledge explanations throughout. So I've got that for AQA A-level biology. Either you can get it for the whole A-level, or you can do it just for one topic. And I've even got a free lesson there if you want to try before you buy, or if you just want some inspiration. So I'll link that in the show notes for you. So this week's resource roundup is my free editable lesson plan template. So have a go at planning your lessons, following what we've gone through today. But obviously I was just talking at you. If you're going to find it easier with the lesson template, then check that out in the show notes. So that is it for today's episode of Miss Estruch Teach and Tell. I hope this has helped you think differently about lesson planning, whether you're starting out or just tweaking things to better support all of your learners. If it was helpful, I would love if you could subscribe or leave a review so that this helps to reach even more teachers to support them. But that is it for today. I'll see you next week. You bring the coffee, I'll bring the teach and tell.